So for this exercise in creating different textures in watercolor, I'm just going to go over the materials first. Here I have a piece of watercolor paper. This happens to be 140 pound Fabriano Artistico. Normally I use Arches cold pressed watercolor paper, and this is cold pressed, but it's Artistico, just to test it out, try it out. It works very similar to Arches from my experience. And what I have done is I have used some masking tape. This is a 1/4 inch, I believe, and I just divided my watercolor paper here up into 4 rectangles, and we're going to use our palette. The colors that I'll be using for this exercise is French ultramarine blue, the primary blue cyan, or you can also use phthalo blue green shade, but you can use whatever colors you have. I'm going to use my transparent yellow. I'm going to use some burnt sienna, and I am going to use some quinacridone coral. So basically the primary colors plus the burnt sienna is really what I'm going to use. And I'm going to use a couple of blues. But again, you don't have to use the same colors as me. You just, whatever you want to experiment with is fine. Then we're going to use 2 types of salt. I have fine salt here and coarse salt here. This happens to be popcorn salt, but if you don't have that, you can just use a regular fine salt. I'm going to use some water in a spray bottle. This happens to be a dot bottle, but you can use a mister bottle, it doesn't matter. We're going to use alcohol, like denatured alcohol, and I put that in a spray bottle. I make sure I marked it loud and clear, alcohol, and I put it in a red bottle so that I don't get it mixed up. And then I have a granulation medium in this spray bottle here. It's the granulation medium from Winsor Newton. Gonna give it one other go. I have tried using it in the past, and I haven't really found that I got much action out of it. But I'm gonna give it another go. And then finally, we're going to use some plastic wrap, some cling film, whatever you want to call it. It's best actually if you have it scrunched up a little bit. And then that is about it. And then of course, water. I always like to have 2 containers of water so I can keep one clean. And then I am going to use a couple of brushes to apply the paint. So let me just get my colors prepared and then we'll get started. Okay, I got all my colors prepared, so you can see I made 2 puddles of each. Here's 2 of the French ultramarine blue. You could also use cobalt blue if you'd rather do that. And here's 2 of my primary blue cyan, which is the same as a phthalo blue green shade. I have 2 of my transparent yellow, my 2 burnt sienna, and then my 2 puddles of quinacridone coral. And you could use quinacridone red, or you could also use a permanent rose if you'd rather do that. It really doesn't matter too much. So I have a total of 5 colors, and it's basically based on the primary color. So I have a warm and a blue cool, and I have a warm red, kind of, it's not 100% a true red, but it's pretty close. And then I have a pretty close to a true yellow here with my transparent yellow, in my opinion. That's pretty close to a true, not a cool yellow. I don't feel that it's really a warm yellow either. And then I have my burnt sienna, which of course is not a primary color. It's a tertiary color. If you look at how you can mix it, you can mix it yourself by mixing yellow and red to create an orange, and then add French ultramarine blue to it until you get color that is similar to a burnt sienna. That's quite easily done. So I like that one because, I like a lot of these textures for nature scenes, rocks, landscapes, that kind of stuff. That's a good mixing color. So we're just gonna go systematically about it. This one here, we're gonna put the plastic wrap on. So let's do that one first. So first I'm gonna wet this area that I masked off. And I already wrote a little note to myself that plastic wrap goes here. And when I'm done, I should also make a note of what colors I put in here. That would be a smart move. And of course you can intermingle these different techniques in one painting, and that's what we're going to do in another lesson where we're going to paint some rocks using some of these texturing techniques. But that's for another class. Coming to you soon. Okay, so that's that. And then I'm just going to take another brush. I'm going to put some French ultramarine blue in. Kind of like that. Then I'm going to take some of my, oh, see that? Can you see how the French ultramarine blue stays put? This one here, which would be a phthalo blue or primary blue cyan, does not stay put, does it now? Not at all. See how that spreads? So that's a mover, and this is not a mover. It's so fun with watercolors. They have so, different properties, so they don't all react the same at all. So there's that. Kind of happy with that. So let's try and put a little bit of the yellow in. Let's put some yellow in here and see what happens. Just going to put some yellow in there. And finally, let's put some of our quinacridone red in and see what happens with that. And want to make sure it has a little chance to mix and mingle. And then finally, let's put a little bit of our burnt sienna in. But can you see there? We already got like almost like a burnt sienna color because the red mixed with both the yellow and with the French ultramarine blue. Want to make sure things don't dry on me. So I'm going to put a little bit more in here. I can see it's already drying. A bit more of this French ultramarine blue. And a little bit more there. And now I better get my plastic wrap on because it dries really fast, especially out there on the edges. So we take our plastic wrap. Just let it give one more little run. See some excess ran off there. And there we go. And let us put this on. So what you do is you just kind of gently lay it down, and then you can see as it touches, it creates patterns. And you can manipulate it a little bit, like pulling, get some lines, but don't mess around with it too much. Just get it down. Yeah, this one. Maybe I'll put a little bit there. Get some texture in there. And maybe here I'll try to do a little twist. There. And that's it. Leave it alone. And it's a really good idea if you put something a little weighted on it, like a book, to really press it down. That works really, really well. So I'll do that in a little bit. But the next one I'm going to do is down here, and I'm going to try and spray in some water and also some granulation medium and see if we get any reaction. Actually, what I can do, I'm just going to put this down here for now. There. And then let's just get some color on the next one here. Not color, first water. Here we go. We want it nice and wet so that things can mix and mingle. There we go. And let's start out with some. We don't have to start out with the same colors, doesn't matter. So here's some red. Let's put a little bit of burnt sienna in. Let's put some yellow in. And let's put some of the primary blue that moves and shakes like it's going out of style. And Then let's put some French ultramarine blue in. A little bit up here. And this we have to let it dry for a little bit. And now I do have to take this off, because I want to be able to move it so that it can mix and mingle. And if you have like a big droplet, let it run off gently to one side and hold your paper in different directions so that the colors can have a chance to mix and mingle. Just that is so much fun, watching that move, I think. See, the more it mixes, the more you get some neutrals. And we're already having some areas where it's beginning to dry out at the corners here. And especially where we have that phthalo blue, have you noticed that dries faster? So we need to let it dry a little bit. On this side here, we want to sprinkle on some water when it's beginning to dry, when it's losing its shine. That's the key factor. So you can see it's very wet still, but I'm already getting some drying areas. So I'm actually going to hold my hand here so it doesn't spray over on the other side, and I'm going to give it a little whiff. And the same down in the corner there where I can see it's beginning to dry. There. And then that was with clean water. On this side is water. And then the other one is the granulation medium. And so now I'm going to do the same thing where I can see it's beginning to dry down in that corner. I'm going to give it a little granulation medium. And we're just going to keep an eye on it. Of course, when the other areas start drying, we are going to do the same thing. And we're going to get some runbacks because you can see how wet it is there and it's already drying there. So we're also noticing that the colors are not drying at an equal rate, so to speak. So that's very interesting to know. Just going to pick up a little bit here. There we go. And then we're going to do this side over here. We're going to do the same thing. So now we're going to do this side. So that's the one where we put salt on. So again, we wet the whole rectangle here that we have masked off with clean water. Try to make sure that we get everything nice and wet. There we go. There, I think that's good. And then we'll grab some of our paints. So this time, why don't we start with a mover and the shaker, which is our cyan or phthalo blue. See how it does those lovely things. Let's take the other blue we have. So French ultramarine blue. This time I'm doing it more in stripes because I'd like to see the difference between the fine and the coarse salt as it goes into the different colors. So that's the red I put in here. It's mingling with the French ultramarine blue. Let's put a little bit more red on. And then let's put some burnt sienna on. Let's watch out here. And finally, let's put some yellow on. Put some yellow on here. And then I want to put a little bit of yellow on up at the top here. Let's do one like this, kind of across like that. And let's just let it run a little bit. Clean up our edges. Need a little clean up here. There. And let's clean up here a little bit. And I'm just going to soak off some of that extra paint down here. Let's run it down here, just so we don't have to wait forever for it to dry. And then, while we let that let's just put, before, you can see we're already getting some drying areas there. So here's our coarse salt. And so I'm going to put that on this side. See, this is already too dry. And let's put it on with the fine on the other side. There. And we'll just have to wait and see what happens, what kind of a different pattern we get. And then we have to take our granulation medium and spray it over on this side, and we have to take our water and spray it over on this side as this is beginning to dry. And we'll see how that works. For the final rectangle, we're going to try and spray in some alcohol. And so again, we're going to do the same thing. First we wet it, clean water, and then we're going to put our pigments on. Let's try some of this in the middle. And some French ultramarine blue here. Let's put some burnt sienna on here. And some of the red. And then finally some of the yellow. I want to put a little bit more of that in, and a little bit more in here. See how that color really has a tendency to want to dry right away. So there was a little hair there. So let it just mix and mingle as much as we can make it. But can you see again here where we put the primary blue cyan on? It dries right away, much faster than the other colors, it seems to me. So that's a very interesting observation that I have not noticed before. So, you know, you never stop learning with these things. Just want to pick up some of the excess right here in the corners. There. And then, where's my alcohol? That's in the red bottle. So let's just get, especially the middle there. There. It's alcohol now that we're spraying with. So we want to compare that to spraying with the water on this side and the granulation medium on that side. And we have to give it a little bit more time to dry, and then we're going to give it another couple of little sprays. And you can also see all the different colors you get. We use the same 5 colors in those 4 different areas. And depending on how much of one or the other, it really changes, and which one mixes with which one, it really gives you a big variety. So that's fun to observe too. So we're just going to give it a little bit more time. It's a little too shiny here. Here we can maybe give it a little spray, and maybe out here I can give it one more in there. And let's see what happens. And here we can maybe give the little bit more with the granulation medium there, and a little bit more of the water here. Okay, let's try and do a little bit more with the alcohol. If it's too wet, it just runs back together again. That's why you want, and if it's too dry, if it's dry, nothing happens. So you have to hit it right there, and it's the same with salt, and it's the same with water and granulation medium. And here it has to be really wet when you put the plastic wrap on. But these 3 here, it's really, timing is everything. You want to hit it right when things are losing their shine, because that's where you'll get the most reaction. See, it looks like that right when it comes on, but then if it's too wet, it runs back together again. That's what happens. Okay, one more up here. So give it a big one down there. They have different drying areas. Now, that was kind of fun. That's actually kind of fun. Let's try in there. See there, it's so dry, nothing much happens. But there, it's pretty interesting. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna stop, and I'm gonna put this back on so that can be pressed down really well. And I can put some water jars on top, like that, so it really weighs it down. So I'm going to let everything dry before we can get to the next stage. So let's see, everything is dry now, including under our plastic wrap. Wow, that was a good texture we got there. Love that. And we can see our salt. Here's the fine salt that I used, and here is the coarse salt that I used. And so you can see, which is not surprising, you get bigger textures with the coarse and finer with the fine salt. And there is a little variety. We can see here with some of the coarse salt, it got on a spot that had already dried too much, so you don't really get anything there. Down here, and the same down here, we got some textures that are flowing out a lot more because it was very wet still. The paper buckled a little bit, so there were not even wetness or dryness over the entire paper, but you know, lots of fun textures. And you can see these can come in really handy both for snowy scenes, both the small and the big salt textures, and also for vegetation. Like this could be made into some kind of flowers or bushes or something like that. And most of the salt you can just kind of gently rub off like this. But some of the salt in the really wet areas, it sticks to the paper and it hurts your hands to try and rub it off. So I like to use a credit card and just kind of scrape it off like this. I'm not going to do it while you listen because it's a terrible sound. But anyway, that's how I do that. So once you have taken the salt off, just run your hand gently over the whole piece, just to make sure there are no salt left on your painting, because salt is corrosive and we don't want that on the finished painting. Now these are just samples, of course, but still. And then here we did water on this side, and then we tried the granulation medium on that side. And honestly, I don't see a big difference. Maybe we did get a little bit more granulation here. I'm not really sure what to make of that. I feel you get pretty much the same texture with just using water, spraying it on when the shine is beginning to leave the paper. That is the key part. And then finally here, we got our alcohol, and it's very close to what it looks over here, but some of the shapes are a little bit different. But I would say that, you know, you can use water and get good texture. You definitely don't have to get the granulation medium, and you don't have to use the alcohol. And with alcohol, you do have to be a little careful because you don't want to breathe alcohol fumes. That's not good for our lungs, so I'm always conscious of that. And of course, I love the plastic wrap. That's a texture technique that I really like a lot, and I use it quite a bit as a background, for instance, or as a jumping off point. And as a matter of fact, I can show you a couple of examples of that. So I recently just finished this little painting, and this is what I use for the background. Now, of course, the colors are paler, but you can see how that creates an interesting background. And then I just, I painted the bird on, and then I just painted a few little branches and didn't have to do anything more with the background. So, and here I put a little bit of salt in. So you can combine these methods. It's not one or the other. You can combine them. You don't have to do it over your whole painting. You can do it in a certain section where you want some texture. So just ideas for you. I'm going to peel off my tape, and then I'm going to write underneath what methods I used and what colors I put on, because it does change also with your color choices. So I'll do that off camera, and then I'm just going to show you the finished sample piece. Okay, so I just took my tape off, and then I wrote plastic wrap, coarse salt, fine salt, water mist, granulation medium mist, and alcohol mist. And then in here I have the pigments: PR209, PY150, PR101, PB29, and PB15:3. That's the 5 colors that I used. And you can use other colors, and I'm actually going to show you that in the next exercise that we are going to be doing. So I hope you had fun and learned something by observing what the colors do when we add these different things to create some texture, and I hope it gives you ideas on future use for paintings and for textures that you might want to put into your paintings.